Welcome back to the Sew to Sell series. And in last week's video, I shared step number 2 for me, which is basically transferring the inspiration from my mood board into a sketch design by hand. But I also shared in that video too that there are digital tools that you can use like Adobe Illustrator and Procreate. And in today's video, I'm covering prototyping. Once I had the inspiration, for me, it was the handmade sketch, I then went into prototyping. Depending on my design, I would either use my dress form or my block bodice. And most of the time I would use my dress form. So they can be quite pricey if you purchase one brand new. So you can check thrift stores, OfferUp, Craigslist, or Facebook Marketplace could be helpful as well. And just by the way, I paid about $150 for my dress form off of OfferUp. And when I was looking around for dress forms at that time, I think the average, I want to say, started around $400 and upwards for like a really nice or really good one. So when I do prototyping using my dress form, I always use muslin. I think it's a good idea to iron your muslin because you want all the wrinkles out to make sure that the fit is just perfect. And you want to use the right needles as you go putting your muslin on the dress form. For me, I would just look at my sketch, I would look at my mood board, and I would put the muslin on the dress form in whatever way matched my sketch. Learning how to use muslin, which I'll talk about in a little bit, is a learning component in its own. I'm not gonna get enough information in this video on how to specifically work with muslin, but what I learned was actually Skillshare. For me, this was a comprehensive, easy to follow set of videos that allowed me to learn how to work with muslin appropriately, but also then after you are working with the muslin on the dress form, to take that muslin and then transfer onto pattern paper. Before I use my muslin, I use some black Styline tapes. I can't remember the name. I'll post it in the description box and a picture here so you know what I'm talking about, but it's not very sticky, but sticky enough to where it will stay for the most part on the dress form. And these are the Stylines, which I will later use when I go to trace over my muslin. And these are important because when you remove the muslin from the dress form, you're going to need those Stylines for then transferring to your pattern paper. So let's talk a little bit about muslin. It's a commonly used fabric for prototyping, for getting that draft version of your garment. There are different types of muslin. I know there are some lightweight, medium weight, heavyweight, but it is a woven fabric and it is relatively cheap. Prices can range. I know you can get some on fabrics.com. I typically get mine from Mood Fabrics, and I have paid anywhere from $4.99 to $6.99 for muslin. But of course, you don't have to buy muslin depending on the garment that you are trying to prototype. If it's like a crop top, you probably don't even need muslin. You can probably use some old scrap fabric somewhere that, is just laying in your closet. If you have some old sheets that you know you're never going to use again, you can use that. One thing I realized too is that you want your prototyping fabric, whether that's muslin or let's say you need to use a really cheap charmeuse. When selecting fabric for your prototype, it's crucial to choose a material with similar weight, drape, and stretch to your final garment fabric. This ensures that your prototype actually reflects the fit, movement, and overall construction of the final design, because variations in fabric properties can impact seam performance, silhouette, and wearability. So consistency between your prototype and your production fabric is key for a precise final result. And that was one of the mistakes that I did when I was trying to copycat my Banana Republic top. My muslin fabric was perfect. It was exactly the way I wanted my shirt to be. But then when I used some linen fabric that I already had, it was much too drapey for the type of fabric that was required for the original idea. So once you have the muslin on your dress form to kind of align with your style lines, you're then gonna wanna use a pencil and trace over those style lines. Once you've traced over the style lines, you bring the muslin to your cutting board or to your table, and you are then transferring the muslin onto some pattern paper. As I was editing this video, I was like, oh, this is very complicated to just understand as you're hearing it. So you can at least check out this video in the meantime, which kind of shows this process a little better, and maybe that can help. Also, this is the very process that I learned in Skillshare. So if you don't have a Skillshare, you could check that out. Again, other places are LinkedIn, Udemy. Maybe in the future we can do an in-depth video on this process that look a little better. So now you've
transferred the muslin to your sewing pattern paper, you're gonna make all your markings that you need, notches, buttonholes, all the goods, and then you're gonna cut the pattern out just like you would a standard pattern from anywhere else, and use the cutout version of that pattern till one, you can put it back on the dress form, making sure the shoulders are fitting appropriately, making sure the length aligns from the front to the back. And once you do that, you can then use that paper pattern you just cut out, use it with muslin, and construct the garment. And that could be your initial first fit for yourself. And don't forget, even if you can't sew, you can always delegate this process to somebody else. Of course, that's gonna require a little bit more capital. You're gonna have to pay somebody, but you can technically be like, hey, here's my sketches, here's the design, please sew this. But to save some money, or if you enjoy this process, of course, you can sew this yourself. And let's say you try your first initial prototype on, you're like, you might say like, oh, you know what, I want to make some tweaks. Maybe I need it a little bigger, smaller in the bust, maybe some variations in the arm length, and then you would just make those adjustments. After you feel good about where your prototype is, then this is where we begin the digital pattern creation.
And that, my friends, is what we're gonna get into next week. In next week's video, we're gonna talk about creating the first draft of the actual digital PDF sewing pattern, which I think will be really exciting. Maybe even show you kind of how to do it on the screen if that helps. But how are you feeling about this process? Do you feel like you're gaining a little bit of clarity? Have you started to do a little bit more research in this process? I would love to hear. Tell me in the comments below. And if you haven't checked out videos 1 and 2, be sure to do that. All right, so I'll see you in the next post. Bye.